Welcome to the webinar. And this is Nebraska Department of Education, What Language Education. And NILA, that's Nebraska Language Association, and CLTA, Chinese Language Teacher Association, Special Interest Group K-12. We are co-hosting this webinar. Today, our guest is Tom Welch. Thank you so much for doing this for Nebraska What Language Teachers and What Language Teachers from other states. Tom, I really appreciate that. I'm so excited for this topic. Tom, could you please take it away? Thank you.
You bet. Well, hello, everybody. I'm really glad to be with you on what is in the Midwest, at least, a very cold and perhaps snowy afternoon. I actually was very happy to help Crystal in any way I can because I have so many deep connections to Nebraska. I grew up there and graduated actually from Grand Island Senior High. At the time I graduated, we had 4 different world languages that were offered, and I unsuccessfully took one of them. I mean, I'll say unsuccessfully, I did pass, but you might figure that one of the reasons I'm so passionate about language learning is because it was so challenging for me early on. I actually did change. I changed from Spanish to French when I went to the University of Nebraska. And then I ended up dropping out of the university at the beginning of, or I transferred and then dropped out of college at the beginning of my junior year and spent about 3 months digging ditches in the south of France. And trust me, that will change anybody. So I came back very enthusiastic and went on and enjoyed a wonderful time teaching French in Kentucky. I had moved there by then. So I spent many years teaching French in Kentucky. Then I became the director of world languages at the Kentucky Department of Education. And then eventually my administration asked me to come back to my home district, which was a small district just outside of Lexington, Kentucky. And I became the principal of a brand new public high school that was opened up. And I insisted that teaching was the most important thing going on in the school. And so everybody involved had to be a teacher. So I and my 2 assistant principals taught one class every day on a block schedule because I believed so strongly in the commitment to what was important, what was going on in the classroom, not going on in the offices. So fast forward, I've been a member of the National Council of State Supervisors for Languages since I was in Kentucky, and I've remained with that group. And there's actually a very, very wonderful group of world language educators that meet weekly. Dr. Mueller is one of the members of that group. And we just dive deeply into trends in world languages and try to be advocates for helping more and more kids gain proficiency in other languages. So that's a little bit about my background. I love this topic. I'm so excited about it. I've got some slides that I'll share with you, but many of you know me well enough to know that I am very comfortable not sticking to a script. I'm very comfortable if you want to interrupt me. It's probably best to do that with your mic because I have trouble sometimes keeping track of the chat and focusing on what I'm trying to do. But without further ado, unless anybody has any comments now, we'll go ahead and let me share this presentation with you. Crystal, do you know why my screen sharing might have been paused? Let me try it again. Oh, maybe because I didn't say okay to the recording. Well, now I have. Well, this could be really interesting, but we'll try it one more time. How about that? And Crystal and I did try this just before we got on today, and it worked fine, of course, but not now. Is anybody seeing my slides, or is it, or not? Crystal, can you see my slides?
Yes, no, I cannot see your site. It says you have started screen sharing. I think it's connectivity problem. Let's give them give it a few seconds. I
Okay.
don't know.
And if anybody who's on has run into this situation before, feel free to jump in and make a suggestion. I work with technology all the time, and the one thing I will tell you is you can't keep up. Your things always go wrong, and you can count on that before anything else.
Okay, it still doesn't show. Other time when the it happened last time. I mean, the first webinar, and the teacher logged out and log in back in, and it worked. I don't know.
Do you want me to log out and back in? Otherwise, we'll go to plan B and we'll
If
still.
you have a plan B, that's great.
Okay, I will log out and come right back in just in case it's mine. And let's see, I want to make sure that I have the link somewhere close so that I'm not spending time hunting for that.
Or Tom, you can also share this link with Crystal so she can play from her side.
Okay, that would be fine. Let me go out and come back in once, and then we'll try that as plan B. And if that doesn't work, we'll go to plan C. Okay, I'll be right back. Very freeing. And it also made me realize that I don't believe in the whole idea of how behind students are after the pandemic. I don't believe in gaps because I respect each individual student as an individual learner who is where they are. And our responsibility as teachers is to help each of them take their next step. And that's really key to understanding an asset-based approach because it's so personalized. Any comments about that? Hey, like I said, don't be afraid to jump in. Allie, were you going to jump in? I saw that your mic went.
But it's whenever you personalize something, it's meaningful to you. And so when it's meaningful to you, it motivates you. And so that's what we need in the language classroom is motivation. And then when they start to see how with effort, they can actually gain language proficiency, they gain confidence and competence. And that asset base is relying on feedback rather than criticism necessarily.
Yeah, and it's got to be personalized. It can't be, oh, the class really, you all need to work on these AR endings for these verbs in Spanish 1 here. Well, no, because some kids understood it perfectly and other kids didn't. So it's got to be personal. And that goes in with the goal setting too. And we'll be talking about that. And I know that's a subject that's near and dear to Allie's heart. So the next thing in here is clearly defined possible expectations. And I can't believe what the standards and the proficiency movement and the can-do statements particularly have done to give us a whole different way to look at language learning. Because now we can define the possible expectations not for classes. And this is where I differ from many of my colleagues, but I don't believe in a set of expectations, for instance, for German 1 or Spanish 3 or French 2. I think what we have now with proficiency and the focus on that, and especially with the can-do statements, we have clearly defined possible expectations that we can help each individual learner set their goals. So I don't want to get too excited too early in our time together here because we won't get to what we really need to. And then the third one is never put a learner in a position where they're not ready to be successful. So I'd love to, let me stop for just a minute. I'm kind of hesitant to stop share, but I like to be able to see you And um, tell me the situation in your schools or your programs. What happens between level 2 and level 3 at the high school? What kind of retention do you have going from one to the other? Very shy people.
As to the attention, I do think the third level students can get everything faster than the second year they continue with the language. I
Why
think
is that, Soon?
uh,
Why do you think that is?
I think it's accumulation, when it is accumulated enough, and then they finally figure out what is their best way to learn this language. So usually the first level is very difficult because you got to know the students. You have to build relationships. You have to make them feel from time to time that they are competent or they can do a good job. So it's all about this. And then after accumulation so much, and I think some of the kids just all of a sudden they can jump. They can jump really far away and than the other kids. And even the struggling kids, if they hang on there, and they can still make progress to that. But different student, the differentiation of learning, they are not the same. But apparently, the third grade student, the third level student, can do far better job, and I think more control, um, more self-control in certain language learning. So
In many programs that I've seen, it's a combination of increasing maturity on the part of the students, but also in many programs that I'm familiar with, there's a big drop off in students who've been in a program to get their 2 credits, for instance. And then once they've got that, if they haven't been real successful, they drop off. And as an administrator, I saw that kind of across the board in things besides world languages. But when I was supervisor, I saw that in many schools, they even budget for that drop off because they'll have, for instance, 3 sections of Spanish 1 and maybe 3 sections of Spanish 2, but then only 1 or 2 of the upper levels. They budget for that because they know kids are going to drop. So I think part of it is we have to be very careful because some of those kids get discouraged by the time they've been in this course for 2 years and aren't being real successful. It's like, why would I want to continue with that? Right?
yeah.
So let me see if I can go back to sharing. Try that. No, not that one. I think I've got it figured out a different way. How about that? Oh, tell me. I shouldn't have done it. Try one more time.
Tom, can I give some comment about this topic?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, I really agree with Sun Lao Shi, okay? We're both her idea. The different levels of students, I think, is level 1 and 2. They just build up a language foundation. So for this culture and language skill, how to learn this language. But some of them, when they enroll of the class, they said they have a little bit interest about this. They want to know more, but we don't know this person or this learner has perseverance or have the skill strategies to master this language and how far these learners can go.
Well, it's that whole idea of perseverance too that I want to
Yes.
talk about a
Perseverance is so
little bit.
important. Somehow some students really interested, but if they cannot keep doing that and they give up, and they will never become a independent learner. So we build up different level is from my perspective is I want my student become a independent learner. Okay, in the future, they can learn this language by themselves through my teaching, guidance. We are basically a facilitator. Uh, Even some of the, students have some of the gift. Okay, we want to develop their skills, their gift, and make them become a successful learners or independent learner in the future. They're lifelong uh, independent learners. So that's just my.
Yeah, I really appreciate that comment. I think one of the nothing I have to say today is about teachers not doing a good job, right? I think teachers are incredible. I'm a teacher at heart. I'm a fourth generation teacher. I've got it in my blood. I think it's the system that does so many damaging things to kids and to teachers. And I think one of the things that we have not really had the opportunity to really think about is the damage that a deficit-based approach does. So one of the things that I thought I would have you do is I want to hear what some of your frustrations are about the current approach to grading, how you grade. And I'll tell you, here's how I define the difference. And this is later in the program, but remember that early slide about traveler, there is no path. That's because we're going to wander some this afternoon, and I don't mind that. In a deficit-based grading system, we are always forced by the system into talking about what the students are doing wrong, where they're falling short. So we don't even think about, oh, well, we gave kids an 85, or this kid got a D, or this kid got a 3.5 on a 5-point rubric. We're always giving feedback on the basis of here's what we wanted, and here's what you gave, and here's the gap, right? And I got really frustrated with that. What are some of the frustrations that you have with grading? I'll share mine in a minute too. I've got those on here.
Well,
But what frustrations?
most grading is, you'd give them a score and then they don't know what to do with that. I mean, I remember getting in my English class a grade for content, a grade for grammar, and there was no feedback. And so that is deficit grading. Had I gotten, then when I did have one class where they had a style book and they actually identified what it was. So then I had the feedback, I could go back and correct it. So I think my frustration is and also comparing yourself to everyone else is another frustration. Why do we have to do that? We're on a trajectory of where are you now? Where do you need to be? And then making the learner become a big part of that process rather than the teacher externally imposing some kind of grade on that person. Shift it to the learner to kind of look at his or her own progress over time.
Yes, and I'm going to come back to that too, because that's really important. And Ali, even with that English grade where you had the style book and you had more feedback about where your errors were, my guess is that when that assignment was complete, you still got a grade like A to F or a percentage grade or something
But
that
I
could
better.
be at the end.
I became a better writer as a result. I could actually see my progress, but
Right.
yeah,
But
it
Tom
was
would
like
say
great.
that's still deficit grading.
Yeah.
It still told you, here's, maybe you didn't fall as far short as you did before, but you still fell short.
Mm-hmm.
Or you got 100, and then we oftentimes have people who don't really believe it's, what's the term when you don't really believe something about yourself? Anyway.
Self-efficacy.
Yeah. Another problem that I have with grades is they're like script, right? they're valuable in the time and place where they're issued. But if I were giving a B to a student in my French 2 class last year, there's no way to compare that to a B, maybe even from a different period of my day, or a B at Lincoln High, or a B in Hammond, Indiana, or any place else. I knew what it was, but it was like script that's instead of dollar bills. It's like, okay, I'll give you this, and you know, and I know what it means, but it doesn't have any real value outside of this. That's what happens when you don't have clearly defined proficiency. Second thing that Ali mentioned was grades encourage comparison and competition. I mean, it's just, hey, what'd you get on the assignment, right? It's not, oh, where did you improve? It's, oh, you got a something and I got a something. And then, you know, the kids, you have some kids who are always at the bottom, right? How does that make them feel? Another one is, in my experience, and this is a big thing with me right now, grades are often they reflect a response to instruction. So did you ever take a test where you stayed up all night studying only to go into the test and walk out saying, oh man, I studied all the wrong things, or they didn't ask me the ones that I was ready for? What does that make sense? I mean, really, that's a problem with grades and a deficit-based grading approach, that where the grade is a reflection of how well you met the teacher's goal for that unit. My goal for the unit is all the kids are going to know all the utensils in the kitchen and all the food that could be prepared using those. Well, that might not have been what the learner studied at all. So I get frustrated by that. Grades should not be a reflection of a response to instruction. They also discourage independent learning. The highlight of my time as principal was when I had an English teacher and we had switched everything in one of the particular programs that we had to asset-based, proficiency-based credentialing and grading. She said, at the end of the summer, at the end of the spring term, May, she said, I had 5 kids come up to me and say, Mrs. Webb, would it be all right if we learned these next things on our own over the summer? Now, I'll just stop for a second. How often do your language kids come up to you at the end of the year and say, would it be all right if I learned the next, give me the textbook for next year. I want to learn things on my own. Is that a common occurrence in your classrooms in May? What's in it for them? I mean, in fact, we don't want them to do that as teachers, because if we've got kids in our class who already know what we're trying to teach the other kids, it's a problem. And how can you have a system where it's a problem when kids know too much? It just doesn't make sense to me. All right, I have figured out how to go back, but it takes a little bit of manipulation because I have to start things over. So while I'm pulling that up, anybody else want to talk about their frustration with deficit-based grading?
I'm actually doing my grading now.
Okay, good.
My students reading and also some grammar sheet. which is one thing make me frustrated is I have so many students and there's a time limitation. Like I need to finish it, I need to down it by weekend, or so I always rush sometimes. I will like actually slow down to talk to them. But when I was doing the grading, maybe I'm doing it at home, maybe I'm doing it like someplace else, which is I could not talk to them directly. So I would like to actually have opportunity to have some like a face-to-face conversation with them, which is that's why I admire some college or university teacher professors. They get like office time, they have office hours, so they actually can pull students out and actually face to face to give the instruction to students. Look, this is a mistake. You are wrong here. You can change it. That's always something I would like to do. And
Oh, I'm so excited that you're here then this afternoon, because I hope by the end of our time together in another 45 minutes or something, you have some real concrete ideas about a way to begin to be able to do that. Grading used to drive me crazy. It was one of the worst things about teaching. You always had those papers on your back waiting for you. Every weekend, you had kids who turned things in on Friday. Oh, it just was awful. I feel bad for you. So we're going to think about how to do things differently and how to go in some other directions. And today, I want you to be in charge of your destination, right? Because I get tickled sometimes by when you're submitting a conference proposal, for instance, and you have to put down what the participants will be able to do by the end of the session. And I'm like, that's not my place, right? Because if I'm true to my guiding principles and every single one of the people is coming to it from a different place, they're the ones who are in the best position to figure out what their goal is for the session. My job is to make sure that by the time they leave the session, they've got the tools to do what they want to do. I don't want anybody to just respond to my instruction today. So here's what I did, and I may step on some toes, right? But here's what I did. I thought, oh, there's lots of different ways to go. And in language learning, here's one of the people I think of. And this is Rick Steves. And I thought maybe more of you were from Nebraska, but Rick was actually in Omaha at the Symphony Saturday and Sunday doing a thing. I love Rick Steves. He's spoke at ACTFL a few years ago, a very pleasant guy, very genuine. But I think, what if Rick Steves had gone into a ninth grade Spanish class, for instance, and the goal for the teacher was, oh, Rick, I'm going to take you all the way to AP Spanish, right? That would have been too bad, because you know what? Rick Steves doesn't need advanced high in any one language. His language goals are more like maybe novice high or intermediate low in 5 languages rather than advanced in any single language. Who's in the best position to know that? Rick is, right? So as you think of students that may be in your class, I hope that you'll begin to take the idea with them. And when we talk about Phil, I'll mention this a little more. But I hope you'll begin to take the idea with them of, traveler on this language learning journey, you're the one that is in control and you're the one that needs to be setting the goals about what you want to accomplish. And maybe you want to go to AP, and fine, I can take you there. I'm a language teacher. But maybe you want to just get to novice high in 3 or 4 different languages. And you know what? That's okay. That's not a failure on my part as part of a language department, not to encourage you to always be going to the next level. My job is to help you become a language learner that's capable of setting your own goals. Did I step on any toes there with that? All right, so you're in control of the situation this afternoon for the time, and you're in control of your destination. So here's what I did. This is kind of funny. I thought, I want you as members of our time this afternoon to think about what you want to do with asset-based assessment. So remember my earlier guiding principles about clearly defined outcomes. So I would urge all of you to become more and more familiar with different AI tools, because AI can solve so many of the issues. So here's, yeah, somebody have a comment about different AI? Well, here's what I did with one of my new best friends called ChatGPT. Charlie and I, which is my name for ChatGPT, Charlie and I had a conversation this weekend, and I said, listen, Charlie, I want to set out a series of proficiency-based steps that a language teacher might choose as goals when it comes to figuring out more about asset-based versus deficit-based assessments. So let me share these with you. So I said, do these in an actful style going from novice low to intermediate mid. So let's take a look, and I'd love to have your comments about it. So here's the first one. I don't need to read them. You're good readers. Right. And you know what? If all you want this afternoon is to become proficient with that very first one, and you leave here feeling good about that, then it's been a complete success for you. Right? What I want doesn't make any difference. It's what you want as
看到什么的话，对吧？
was that a comment from me or somebody whose mic was open? All right, so think about these, and you can see them again. Crystal will have them. Or by novice mid, we get to things that are a little more sophisticated. I don't want to be talking with students anymore about what they did wrong. I want to be able to shift to what they are doing right vis-a-vis the can-do statements in the proficiency guidelines. Now, see this one down here? I can list at least 5 can-do statements that align with asset-based assessment. You know how you do that for individual kids? I'll show you hopefully, but you go in and you can cut and paste what they did into one of the AI tools. I've used several of them. They'll do it because they know the proficiency guidelines. I don't know if you knew that. I can go in and I'll show you an example later that I've got included, where you can go in and say, hey, listen, assess this according to the can-do statements. Give me feedback about what proficiency level this reflects on the part of the student, and then suggest what their next logical proficiency steps should be. Has anybody tried doing that? You all are making this really hard on me because I feel like I'm talking into the void. But let me go on until you stop me. I'll go on. Let's look at what novice high would be. And once again, I want you to think about these and say, oh, wow, yeah, that's what I need to be able to do when it comes to making the transition from an asset-based, from a deficit-based to an asset-based.
These are really nice guidelines for the teacher, Tom, for the teacher to see how proficient they are at implementing the asset base? Can I actually describe these can-do statements that will help students reflect on their own progress? Right, how am I doing that? It's great.
Yeah. And the thing about it is, if you want, you can go back into some of the AI programs like ChatGPT, take one of these and say, I'm a little bit confused about how I could do that with my second year Chinese students or with my third year German students. Give me some examples, and boom, it'll do that. And then I went to a few more that are a little bit more advanced. So now we're into intermediate low.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and I like this, the third one down. I can reflect on my current grading system and identify one aspect that I could shift toward an asset-based approach.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll hopefully have time to talk about how you might do that. And then I went finally to intermediate mid, which is, in my estimation, more leadership and advocacy. So you may get very excited about an asset-based approach to assessment. You may try it with a lesson or a unit or a chapter or a class and become so sold on it that you want to advocate for that for the rest of your department. What would it take to do that? Because remember, Tom's #1 guiding principle, absolute respect for the individual. So the other teachers in your department are not you. They haven't had your background. They haven't had your experiences. They may have been feeling very successful as a very traditional deficit-based teacher. And you're going to have to be,
Well, and this is a big problem, Tom, in the schools. I have one of my students from Spain who's right now teaching at a big public school in the Omaha suburban area. And he's being given the unit tests that everybody has to take. They call that, being equitable, which is kind of funny at this point.
Yeah.
But he just doesn't know what to do with that. And he has been trying to kind of figure out, what do I do? He tried to inform them about some of the things we're talking about, but got a lot of pushback. So that was really frustrating for him. So yeah, that is the problem, these forced assessments
Yeah.
with Spanish sections of 12 different teachers. I mean, I don't know where anybody ever came up with the idea that that was really a good thing to do, but that's where we are.
Well, let's take a quick break and let's ask Charlie about it. Hang on. He should be down here. How much of my screen am I still sharing? Are you seeing anything?
We're seeing the Google site.
Okay, you're not seeing ChatGPT. Okay, I'm going to stop and I'm going to see if I can pull up ChatGPT for you.
Yeah, this is a great tool, you all, that Tom is showing you. This is amazing. You don't have to do all this work yourself.
Are you seeing it now? Are you seeing a different screen?
Yep.
Okay, so see down here where it says message ChatGPT, I'm going to say, I'm in a school, and you don't have to worry about spelling, still gives common assessments across a language level. I'm trying to shift to an asset-based approach. How do I convince the rest? How do I convince my
Colleague.
department
Yeah.
head to take a closer look at? I think it knows what ABA is because I've used it so much.
Hi, Tom. My
Yeah.
my laptop is dying. I'm switching to the phone. Sorry.
Okay. I think you've made a couple other people co-hosts, right? So we
Yeah.
should still be.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so I I like this just because I've found that Charlie helps me think, right? He or she, Charlene, whoever you want. ChatGPT is a brainstorming buddy for me. So, Ali, in the case of your colleague that you were just talking about,
Uh-huh. When students see progress on their own terms, outcomes research show that. Yeah, this is nice because you can probably find the sources too, right?
yeah.
And then come back and say, hey, this is research based.
Oh, yeah, I could show you. Maybe tomorrow we'll talk about a new AI tool in neural network that I've just found for research. But, it's one of those things where even if you could say, listen, I understand, I just want to try something with one class where we can use them as the experiment and everybody else can be the control, and we'll see how that goes for just one class, right? Out of 12 teachers in all those sections, we could do it with one section maybe. But I mean, I love being able to use this as a thought partner for those very things that you were talking about, Ali.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let me see if I can pull this up again.
Well, and I think what you said is being a brainstorm buddy. I think that's important. You know,
Yeah,
it's somebody that can help you think and then you can take it from there.
exactly. And oftentimes, teaching can be a very isolated thing because you're working so hard all the time. You don't have time to really sit down and talk with colleagues. You want to talk about other things besides school sometimes. So that took you novice low through intermediate mid. Why do you think I didn't go into detail, not just in the terms of time? Why do you think I didn't go into detail here for these other levels? For proficiency, for can-do statements for these others when it comes to understanding going to an asset base from deficit base? The real reason is this is so new, nobody really knows. I mean, we're just at the outset of this. So, just content yourself with taking beginning steps. So here's key attributes of deficit-based. This goes back to some of those novice low things, right? A focus on errors. Gave you a vocabulary quiz, you got 8 out of 10. You had 23 out of 25. We had something else. I gave a quick writing assignment, homework assignment, whatever. It's points, 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 right? Here's another thing. It's comparing to an ideal standard. Yeah, I didn't know that's what you were looking for this time, right? Students are labeled as behind, one size fits all. Assessment is gatekeeping. I think there are, I think deficit-based assessment, which trust me, that's all most of us have ever known, right? It's the way we were taught. It's the way we've been teaching. We haven't even had the chance to think about doing it differently because that's just the way you do it, right? Kids get A's, B's, C's, and D's. They get 0 to 100, or if you're in a different country, maybe it's 0 to 10. We just don't think about it. So what's wrong with it? Well, let me tell you. I think one of the things is I did a little more research and asked Perplexity, I guess it was, Perplexity AI, to identify some of the top factors plaguing schools today. One was chronic absenteeism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Another, disengagement. Kids don't feel connected. When are we ever going to use this? Kids who feel like they are behind, they don't understand. True confession, I was always one of those kids who was a chapter or two behind, right? I understood in chapter 7 oh, that's what we were doing in chapter 5. Now I get why those verb endings were important or why that adjective agreement was important. But it didn't make sense to me then, but it does now. Oh, but you're still going to penalize me for what I didn't know about chapter 5 at the exact moment you wanted me to know it. That doesn't make sense to me. Another thing, kids who disrupt class because they're bored or just, whatever. And then the fifth major thing that was identified was mental stress on kids today. And I'll tell you, it's in some ways oversimplification, I'm sure, but I think a great deal of this can be laid at the feet of deficit-based assessment. Think of the kids who come to school every day, and in one way or another, they are getting the message in every single class, you're not good enough. You're behind. You didn't measure up to what I wanted on this. Even if imposter syndrome is what I was trying to think of before. Even if you're getting A's, a lot of times the kids are like, yeah, I got an A, but I didn't really know it or know what I knew. That's because of deficit-based grading. It's just so difficult for kids. So what's the alternative? And I'll go back to this. See this photo? This is not a photo. I created this with Midjourney. And yet you'd say, oh, that's the little kid I saw at the grocery store last week. So if you're not using these tools, you need to be. When do you have time, right? I know. So let's imagine and create an alternative. So I want you to imagine and help create an alternative that's growth-oriented, where you can recognize and celebrate what students can do. Now, I think a lot of people...
Back to the whole idea of a portfolio that used to be all the rage a while back, where students actually then are graded based on how much progress they've made rather than where they were at specific points in time.
Yes, I would agree to a point. And that point is that students still received some sort of a final grade. Right? Your portfolio was not used to propel your writing, for instance, to the next level. It was used to assess your success up to that point. And I think that's one of the critical differences that I see with an asset-based approach using proficiency and the can-do statements. Because instead of saying, here's what you did wrong with this writing assignment, and maybe I'll skip ahead and show you some examples. You can say, oh, hey, listen, yeah, here's what you were able to do with that. Now, what do you need to go to the next level? And eventually you get to the point where errors are a problem, right? And they need to be addressed and corrected before a student can be successful taking their next step. But rather than saying, here's what you did and you're getting a grade on it now, it's here's what you're doing. Let's look at what you did right and how that helps you set your goals for your next step towards success in whatever area it is. Yeah, I'll keep going. Continuous improvement. Use can-do statements. I cannot imagine, I'll just say it right out. You can't do asset-based assessment in a world language classroom without using the can-do statements. Otherwise, it just becomes a little game that you're playing by yourself with your kids. It's also why I step on a lot of toes and I don't care. I'm old and, people know I have wild ideas. I don't believe in the concepts of formative and summative assessment. there's, in my mind, there should never, ever be anything called a summative assessment. In an asset-based approach, every assessment, and I'm fine with assessment, every assessment is a formative-based assessment, not to help the teacher determine their instructional needs, as I just heard a webinar last week talk about. No, it's formative assessments are to help individual learners determine their next proficiency steps according to the individual can-do statements that are tagged with where they are. Boy, if that doesn't elicit some conversation, I don't know what will. What do you think? Let's stop for a minute.
Okay, well, I'll open the can of worms.
Please.
I want some others though to pile in on here. I do believe that a summative assessment it serves a purpose as a form of program evaluation. Are we meeting there are standards in our profession, and there are accountability factors that we have to meet, whether they're state or federal or whatever they are. And so it kind of gives us a clue as to where we stand. I like to know where my program stands based on these standards so that I know what areas I need to improve.
But isn't that really, aren't you talking about a formative assessment to help you know where your program needs to improve?
Well, it's I'm thinking of kind of like the NCATE criteria for teacher education colleges. They have 95 criteria, and I mean, it's a little overwhelming there. But a teacher ed program evaluation, what are the criteria going to be that how do you compare to what the most successful programs are?
Well, let's break it back down into a student though for a minute. I know we oftentimes give summative assessments at the end of a term, right? So my buddy Bob over here was a science teacher. Bob, when you were giving final exams, and listen, I've made more mistakes in teaching and instruction than anybody here because I'm older than anybody here. So trust me, I'm not trying to point fingers or anything. But Bob, when you were giving a final exam in biology, for instance, we called those summative, but were you grading kids? Had they learned everything in biology that they're learn?
Oh, under no circumstance.
Right.
The kids always asked me for a review guide, and I told them that I would not provide them one, because if I gave them a review guide, that was all they would study. I said, I want you to go back and look at the entire semester's work. I says, those questions could come from any part of, the things, and some students will have paid attention to some of them. And again, it goes back to the interest.
Yeah.
Were they interested in a particular portion? They'll do very well on that portion of content, but not on the things that they were not interested in. So yeah, I wish I'd have known this when I started my teaching career. It would definitely have changed my trajectory.
Yeah. Well, it's changing your directory now as a board member. It's certainly changing my direction as just a passionate person when it comes to languages. But think if every class had the equivalent of the can-do statements that went to advanced or superior level. When a kid left your biology class, you said, yeah, you finished yours input into biology learning, but I'm sharing with you how much more there is. And I would love for you to keep going with that, whatever way and if you come back sometimes and spend an hour with me or something, could, but there's always more. It's never a summation of what your learning should be. So you know what, in the interest of time, I want to switch now to a very closely aligned topic that goes along with this, and that is, how do you use an asset-based approach to help kids keep going beyond what the limits of a classroom were? So I'm going to do my little magic here that I've started to learn how to do and see if I can pull the slides back up. Because I want to talk to you about Phil. And this isn't like Charlie. It is Phil. So, sorry this is so torturous to switch back and forth, but at least I'm able to do it. So we go through this. Yeah, you can get this from me. Drop me a line. I'll send you the slide deck or ask Crystal for it. So one of the things that goes along with this is you have to think about proficiency and not performance. And listen, I'm kind of a slow learner, and it really took me longer than I would care to admit to really understand the difference between proficiency and performance, especially when my colleagues were all talking about IPAs, integrated performance assessments. And I started to think, wait a minute, integrated performance assessments are just that. They are performance assessments. They are not something that, generally speaking, there can be exceptions, but generally speaking, they're not tied to individual learner proficiency, because everything could be a proficiency assessment as you're working along if you're using the can-do statements. So there are ways to deal with this. And here's what it comes down to. I don't know if any of you read this book. It's been out for, gosh, 15 or 20 years now, but I really like Dan Pink. And he talked about, here are the things that are needed for people to become autonomous as learners or anything else. They need control over time, team, task, and technique. And usually teachers can't cede any of that over to the learner. You're going to be in here for 55 minutes a day learning German with me. You're going to be with other German 2 kids. You're going to follow the curriculum that I'm following because I've got a curriculum guide that I've got to follow. And here's the way I want you to show me that you have successfully responded to my instruction. How do you break out of that? Well, you can actually. So let me see if this will go. Wouldn't it be nice if this worked? Oh, look. All right, so great. Here is, I went to ChatGPT and I said, hey, I need an example of a publicly available writing assignment for a Spanish 1 student, which would allow me to show the difference between a deficit-based approach to the assignment and an asset-based approach. Don't you love being able to do this? I mean, we could have only dreamt about doing this years before. So here's the assignment that the teacher gave. Write a 100-word essay describing your family's weekend activities. Use the past tense and include at least 3 different verbs. Sounds like a good Spanish 1 assignment. Here was the student response. Here is what, in a deficit-based assessment environment, would have been one way to respond. Several mistakes there, pointing them out, one with the verb tense, another vocabulary, some problems. So you need to work on your past tense conjugations and your vocabulary usage. So your grade is a 70. Right? There you go. I'm giving you feedback. It's formative. I've shown you what the mistakes are. You correct them. But in an asset-based approach, here's the feedback. And this isn't just everybody's a winner, everybody gets a trophy for participating. No, this is going to be very specific feedback. But here's the last part is what I like. Keep up the good work and continue practicing your past tense. And then it's went into that. But then I said, hey, now connect that asset-based approach to the appropriate can-do statements that would be appropriate for a student at that level. So, when you wrote that, here were the can-do statements that were most appropriate that you were working with. And here's the asset-based approach. And here's what I want you to do next. Now you need to ask questions about other people's weekends to build on your interpersonal skills. Now, this has all the hallmarks of being able to be used eventually as an integrated proficiency assessment, not a performance assessment, because I'm not going to grade your performance on what I assign for you to do. That's not the point. I want a proficiency assessment that will take you along. So here are some writing can-do assessments for writing. And remember, no learner is ever at the same point of proficiency across all the modes and modalities and anything else. They're at different places with each one. And your ability as a language teacher is to help diagnose that and also to begin to suggest what that individual learner can do to take their next step. Now, if you're listening thinking, yeah, Tom, you spend way too much time thinking, you don't have 100 kids or 120 kids that you're trying to work with. Can't do it. Well, I'll tell you, remember stepping on toes? I have great respect for many of my colleagues who've done a lot of research. Carol Ann Tomlinson, for instance, is kind of the queen of differentiated instruction. I don't buy it. I do not believe differentiated instruction. I think it's from the ninth pit of hell as far as teachers are concerned, because it puts all the responsibility on the teacher. Hey, with this, you know what I'm doing with the kid? Hey, Maria, you turned in that writing assignment. Now go over to ChatGPT, ask it to assess that for you, ask it to help you determine what your next steps are, maybe put in there too what you are interested in, and have it suggest to you what you might do next. This is not 100. This is not for a minute a teacher having to figure out what to do for 100 or 120 different kids. Please.
What I think it was Ye that said, building those independent learners, right? Yeah.
I think it's a May says. But I do like, get rid of differentiate meeting because this planning is hell. Is hell for teachers.
Yeah.
And then we have to present it to the administrators. What about what differentiation I plan and what I'm achieving? It's a burden to planning though.
Oh, awful. Well, we have just 10 minutes left, and I want to show you what I think is one of the most exciting things that's going on in language learning right now. So I'm going to stop my share and then, or are you seeing my Google Doc again? I mean, my slides?
Yeah, now I see, now the slides are on.
Yeah, the
Okay,
slides.
so you're seeing, you already have the pieces in place?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, yeah, Nebraska and other places, you are in the catbird seat. You have HAL, which is highly accelerated learners, as an area that you can work with. But here are the three things that you have to have a proficiency-based program, not a well-meaning performance-based program that includes can-do statements, right? I don't have too much patience for that. You need the can-do statements. You need reliable, validated assessments that are not in-house, right? They've got to be someplace you can use the Apple, you can use the OPI, you can use Stamp, but you've got to have a way to validate for the learner as well as for your program the proficiency. And then the last thing you have to have is competency-based credits, Because remember the situation where I described before, the kid who said, why should I learn anything on my own over the summer? Because it's not going to do me any good. Well, the reason those kids asked Mrs. Webb if they could learn on their own was because they knew that as soon as they came back in the fall, they could take the assessment. And this was not language, this was English language arts. They could take the common end of course assessment the first week of school, and if they passed it, they could already get that credit for that whole next year's work. Competency-based credit is an absolute must. Do not initiate what you're calling a proficiency-based course if you don't allow students to earn credits when they have demonstrated the knowledge. It doesn't matter if it's in December or March or whenever it might be. They need to be able to earn that credit and receive that credit when they have demonstrated what they need. Now, they can still stay in your class, right? Because that was just a formative step, they still know, and you're still helping them see, oh, yeah, you were at novice high, and that's what we required for 2 credits at the high school level. Now you're just going to continue working. Here's what you work on next for intermediate low. It's seamless if the teacher's not trying to instruct everything. So one of the things that we did, and I'll tell you about this real quickly, very exciting. See the guy here in the middle. This is Ryan Allen, and he teaches in Delmar High School in Delmar, Delaware. He's running a Phil class, and some of you were in the session last year that I did about Phil. Ryan is a Spanish teacher, 4 sections of Spanish. Well, actually, he was on a block schedule. 3 sections of Spanish and 1 section of Phil. He had 23 students in his class. Those students were learning 10 different languages, including Asian languages, Mandarin, Korean, and Japanese. He couldn't instruct, right? They couldn't do anything with instruction. He had to have a toolkit that was big enough to account for that. And a lot of that was through AI, right? So Ryan worked with these kids. I'm going to stop share here because I'd love to see the looks on your face when I talk about this. Ryan had these kids for 73 days from the beginning of school at the end of summer until partway through January, including 3 weeks off for the holidays and then several snow days. He had many of those kids who took the stamp test and were validated at novice high and got their 2 credits at Delmar High School in 1 semester.
Oh, but they were on block scheduling and they met every day for 90 minutes.
Right. So
that's like the equivalent of 2 semesters.
Yeah, but still they got credit for 2 years worth with no instruction. Yeah. Remember, there was no instruction, there was no curriculum, there were no tests and quizzes along the way, and yet those kids were able to have validated assessments that showed their language level at novice high, including the student in Japanese and 1 student in Korean, which that blew my mind. Because
on a proficiency test.
Yeah, on a proficiency test.
Are you, Tom, are you talking about the students are multi-language speakers, but they passed the STEM test? Or
they passed the stamp test, but they were not from a heritage background. How could you do that, right? How could you do that? Well, Phil, by necessity, is an asset-based approach. He can't do it on a deficit-based approach, a deficit-based assessment system like he does his regular Spanish class. He had to use an asset-based approach. And there's a lot to it. I mean, we could do another whole session, very obviously, or a couple of them on how to make Phil work. But the point is that I keep falling back to no direct instruction, no tests where they responded to instruction, no integrated performance assessments, no curriculum that they were following. They were using personalized learning goals, personalized goal setting. Ali could give you all the background on that. They were using the principles of Vygotsky and the proximate development and Krashen and comprehensible input, where they were listening to a lot of sources, but they were things that those students were interested in. They didn't have to depend on what chapter 3 in the book said that the teacher was going to be helping them learn that month or that week. If they were like the student studying Korean was a K-pop fanatic, right? Well, she learned Korean using K-pop as her guiding content organizer. All right, you know what? It's 5:09. We have 6 minutes left, so I'm going to do the polite thing and stop here. Obviously, I had 20 more slides or something. I had a more complicated example of student writing at a higher level that I fed into ChatGPT and then had it assess for the appropriate can-do statements. But it can be done. We have tools now as people helping others learn language that we didn't have before. I don't want any more language teachers. I don't want anybody teaching language. I want people helping individual learners increase their proficiency in other languages. And we can do that now. What was that?
I don't know. It might be just an accident.
Yeah.
Tom, from my understanding of your, though you haven't finished all the slides, are you saying that teacher give a positive feedback instead of a negative feedbacks? For example, when we observe or when we do some kind of evaluation, we can tell students, well, you have mastered this, 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 and we don't tell them, well, you failed this, this, this. So is it what you mean also?
Yes, but I don't want anybody to leave with the idea that, oh, this is all just feel-good stuff and nobody ever does anything that needs to be corrected. That's not it at all. It's by closely paying attention. First of all, Ryan said that one of the key things that made his Phil class successful was he spent several days at the beginning of the term helping the students become very familiar with the proficiency levels and the can-do statements. So they knew. So when you're giving feedback to a student, yeah, you don't need to focus on the negative. You can say, oh yeah, let's look at the can-do statements. Let's focus on what you demonstrated you were able to do. Oh, you weren't quite ready, able to be successful on that can-do statement. What do we need to do in order to get you there? Well, let's go ask.
One of the phrases I really like, Tom, is I was in church one day a while back, and it's not learning being done unto them, it's being done by them. And so they're actually engaged in the process of learning, and they're understanding what it takes, what are the skills it takes to really see at what level am I at and how can I get better. So they're engaged in that learning process. They're not being given things. They're figuring out for themselves to build that autonomy, which is of course what we're after, so that they do that outside the classroom, right?
Yeah. And the other thing with Ryan's class is those kids knew that if they couldn't demonstrate proficiency on a valid, reliable instrument at the level that they needed to, they weren't getting any credit,
Right.
right?
Yeah. So
How
there is
many
good data.
kids slide by with a C or a D?
Yeah.
Right?
That's a really good point there.
It's a great motivator. That's why I say again, you shouldn't even think about doing proficiency or asset-based assessment or anything else without proficiency-based credentialing. And you could even do that for one chapter, right? You could say, all right, let's identify the can-do statements in this chapter. And some texts do that now. I've seen them. I had our friend from Wayside Publishing give me a book at ACTFL. And I know that there are can-do statements, but you say, okay, let's identify the can-do statements that are appropriate for you right now. Here are the ones highlighted in the chapter, but here's what we're going to do. The important thing is not the content of this chapter. That's only the context for the can-do statement. And if you want to use a different set of content to provide that context for the can-do statement, that's okay. Because the important thing is not the content in the chapter. It's the context that provided for the proficiency goal that you set. Anybody doubt that this stuff gets me excited? I mean,
Can I give 2 minutes of the
sure.
what I'm doing and let me share with you, okay? I have been doing the project-based learning for 3 years.
Oh,
I embedded all the asset, you like a asset-based learning, those proficiencies, and we build up like a benchmark, and the students can, climb up. But I'm not low my bar, but I want help them to reach that bar. Even they have different peoples, different learning style, but I help them to lift them up, go to that level. So we have a design of the some of the project, but it's like a project-based learning. So you have to not performance, can do something, solve some problem. If I give them cultures and also embedded with the vocabularies and everything's together, they can accomplish something. Okay, so and
yeah.
then I have the assessment for either quiz or either some different kind of benchmark like writings, doing the Google slide presentations and orally, and work with the teams. So it works really good. So I embedded this kind of uh, asset-based, assessment. So embedded with a different benchmark. So we
Yeah.
how to the students very interested and have a personal touch, personal connection, and also they are a little bit open, give the different peoples because they have different way to express to solve the problem. I give them freedom. So this is kind of like open, but it's guided by the teacher and supported by the teacher, but also climb up, can do statement or can start embedded in this project.
Yeah, I think the teacher's role is actually more important in a proficiency-based, asset-based environment because the teacher is the one who has to develop that relationship to motivate the learner. And you don't really have that opportunity. And anybody who, I appreciated your comment about not lowering the bar, because I would challenge departments across the country to say, hey, listen, what if you couldn't give a credit to a kid who hadn't reached the standard level of proficiency? I think there are a lot of kids getting less than stellar grades who finish without the level of proficiency that's required. Or every state document I look at has the proficiency goal there you know, our goal is that kids would get to this level by such and such time, this proficiency level. But none of the documents that I've looked at say what happens if a kid doesn't meet that goal. It doesn't say, oh, the kids don't get a credit.
One
Oh.
of the things that, May kind of pointed out, and you too, Tom, is learning is not a spectator sport. They have to become engaged. They can't just watch it like a sports view. They have, in order to really progress, they have to be engaged. So I think I've given a session on that. Learning is not a spectator sport.
And
It is.
yes, and the students are really in the center. Okay,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
teamwork. Even in the team, they have different kids, and they are learning how to be accountable.
Yep.
And hold together and reach out, and also have the different person. Even sometimes they are lazy, they don't want to do it, but if they see their kids in their group, they are all jump up working on that. Only one of the person left behind, and he will come return to this group. So
And
it's
you
kind
can
of
give
like
them all,
interesting.
and you can
And
give
if
them
they
all.
know they're not getting that credit without the ability to reach the proficiency level,
Yes.
that kind of is something too. Hey, I want to respect everybody's time. I know we're already a few minutes
Nice.
over. I didn't see till just now that my friend Shuhan is here too, it looks like. So Shuhan, I didn't have a chance to maybe greet you individually when you came in. I was focused other places, but if that is you, my friend Shuhan, and not somebody else with the same name, then greetings, and it's good to see you. All right, remember,
That was great.
I love to interact with people. Don't be shy about sending me an email. If you want a copy of the slides, if you want to talk more, if you want to listen to those podcasts that I was talking about, they're all available for you. Otherwise, I'll hang around for a while.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tom.
Yep.
We'll stay for a little while for further questions. But I do think, Tom, after the assessment, your point of view, it is going to be a kind of revolutionary for teaching, for word language teaching. Yeah, it's not easy to promote this idea, especially when you have colleagues like they want to use their 10-year-old syllabus or teaching plan. They don't want to change anything, and they don't want to hear anything.
I would say the first thing that I would do would be go to ChatGPT and ask for some brainstorming help about, how do I work? Here's what my colleague is like. Here's the characteristics. Here's how long they've been teaching. How do I really have a conversation with them about this, or what might I show them that would help them understand? And it doesn't have to be all at once, right? Like I said before, you could take one writing assignment in one unit in one class where you had kids work with this in accordance with the can-do statements and the proficiency levels. Doesn't have to be, and it shouldn't be, oh my gosh, the whole department is going to switch to asset-based assessment and proficiency-based credit next year. Oh my God, that would be a terrible thing to do. Nobody's ready, right? Nobody's